Hi, everybody. Everybody hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go ahead. So today we finished chapter 10. Probably start chapter 11. We'll see if we have time. It's not going too deeply in the technical details of the chapter. I'll stick with a more high-level version of it. Okay, so just to remind you what we were talking about. So we had seen chapter 10 is about what they say it's economic issues and concept, but it's about monopolies. And we've seen the basic monopoly, which is the monopoly that cannot discriminate with price. So that means that if you want more customers, you have to lower your price to lure in the last customers. So it means that, yes, you increase your total revenue from selling more stuff, but from over all the units that you were previously selling, you have to sacrifice this extra money that you lose because you have to charge a lower price. So there's this compromise that you have to make all the time as a non-discriminating monopoly. So today we're going to see a bit about discriminating monopolies and the long term, cartels, some interesting stuff. All right. Yeah, so what's up with the very long run? So everything we've seen so far, every time you see some partial equilibrium analysis where you have supply and demand, it's a very static thing in the sense that we imagine that the technology is fixed and that all we were looking at is the market state at one time, one place. And we're looking at all the combination of price and quantity, which would allow consumers to buy stuff and firms to produce. And we're going to we see what price is going to be the price chosen by each agent. Now, in real life, what happens, of course, is that things change as time goes on, and especially technology changes as the years pass. And this process of technological innovation will change things and will allow some firms to thrive while others that cannot adjust or cannot innovate to fall behind. And one of the first economists to describe this was Joseph Schumpeter. In his famous phrase is the process of creative destruction, by which innovative firms introduce new products and old firms die. And in a sense, it would seem from the first glance that it's inefficient that firms go away, but if they are replaced by newer firms, then all the better. Every time you have invested in some technology, it's sad to basically lose your edge on the market. But I wouldn't imagine that many of you would feel, oh, it's so sad that we abandoned an old technology like anything, like for instance, horses, because some people lost their livelihood when cars were introduced. But now we have cars, and we think it's a great thing that we did have it. All right, so that's for creative destruction. And one of the aspects is that in order to create, you need to invent new stuff. And to invent stuff, you have to have some budget for it. So what essentially Joseph Schumpeter realized is that, well, in a sense, monopolies are the ones that are able to set aside resources to invent new things. So how come? Well, since monopoly, contrary to firms in perfect competition, they do have pure profit. But it's not like this pure profit is just goes in their pocket and they don't do anything with it. The thing is, to obtain this good place in the market as a monopolist, I had to go to the bank and tell them, yeah, I'm going to develop this new product, but this costs money. So the fact that you make this pure profit allows you to pay back this investment, and also allows you to still create new things and keep your edge on the market. So it allows you to innovate further and keep the process going. So what you could say is, yeah. So monopolists use their pure profit to pay back investment, innovation, and innovate further. Maintain. Place. And this is true for monopolists, but as we're going to see in the next chapter, it's true also for firms that are, well, it's maybe even more true when you're not exactly a monopolist, but you have some big competitors, and you know that if you just sit back and you don't do anything, then you're in a really bad position. So one example would be, for instance, Intel. So Intel was just king of the world, let's say 10, 15 years ago. They were very hard to beat. And AMD was, so Intel, by the way, it's a computer chip producer that probably most of you have in your computer. And a competitor of Intel was AMD, but they were almost bankrupt back then. Yeah, so you would have thought if you're working at Intel, well, it's just good forever. But so then I don't know what happened, but they had a hard time. So they had pretty ambitious goals in terms of innovation to create even better chips that didn't pan out. And a genius CEO started at AMD. So I think her last name is Shu. I'm not sure. Anyway, she's very, very smart, and she caught up to Intel. And nowadays, AMD and Intel are neck and neck, and you could even say that AMD has an edge. So that's what happens when you don't continue to innovate. Sometimes your competitor can catch up to you. All right, so yeah, this is a quote from Schumpeter. Yeah, so what he's saying is that monopolists are powerful engine of project progress in the long run expansion total output. Yeah, so of course, that's if monopolists use their edge to innovate further. Now, do all monopolists do that? Not necessarily. One counterexample I would would be Jeff Bezos. So Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, he was a great innovator, yeah, maybe 10 years ago, but so now I don't know what he's doing. He's using his money to fight against competitor, and so yeah, if yeah, monopolists can be a force for good, but they can also not be a force for good. All right, so that's for monopolists. Now we're going to see something that pretty much looks like a monopoly, but formed by not one firm, but a few firms. So the cartels. So what are cartels? Well, it's a group of firms that realize that, oh, well, actually, let's stop fighting. It's not nice to fight amongst each other. our real goal here is to extract as much money as possible from consumers. So what we're going to do is, rather than produce such that here we would say that marginal cost equal to demand. So that's what they would do in a perfectly competitive setup. And they would produce QC and sell at low price PC. So they realize, oh, why don't we just decide to, if a monopolist would make pure profit, well, let's just do as a monopolist would do, and then share amongst each other the extra profit that we make. So we can decide that the most we're going to sell is not QC, but QM. And so we're going to, and why? Because that's where the marginal revenue crosses the marginal cost. And we're going to sell not at PC, but at price of PM, and then make a pure profit. Here, we don't have the average total cost, so I cannot show to you what the profit would be, but it's exactly the same profit as would be done by a monopolist. And so somebody know, is that are cartels legal or illegal?
Depends what they're selling, sir.
Oh, that's a super good answer. So do you have an idea what
If they're selling certain questionable substances, then they're probably illegal. Other than that, they're usually protected. They're okay. They're legal.
Yeah, not all. So what you're saying is if it's drug cartels, it's illegal because it's selling drug is illegal. Is that it?
Pretty much. There's no laws that explicitly say that corporations can't form cartels amongst themselves. There's nothing that explicitly says that in the law.
Wow, really? You mean
I think yes. I think there's a law against that.
well, I
For
assume
trust,
that.
yeah.
Oh, okay. I assume that was the case in Canada or in North America. I know it's definitely a case in Europe. So, wow, you're taking me by surprise here.
So what I mean is, like, if they're forming trusts, like you know, like how Theodore Roosevelt did a lot of trust busting when he was president.
Yeah.
That then there's laws protecting against that, but there's nothing, to my knowledge, there's nothing that explicitly prevents, you know, like say the airline industry competing amongst themselves in such a way that it prevents new entrants or makes it difficult for new entrants to get into the market.
Oh yeah, for sure, this is true. But what I'm saying is price fixing is coordinating amongst each other to set a high price in the industry.
Actually, sir, on the topic of pricing, the airline industry in the U.S. was under regulation was regulated up until the 70s, until the Deregulation Act passed. Would that be considered a form of a cartel? Like if the laws are explicitly stating like who can run what routes, what prices they can charge and whatnot.
Yes. So my general impression is that cartels are mostly illegal on the law side, but it's very difficult to enforce it. So it's possible that I don't know the specific story about airlines, but yeah, in general, it's cartels are illegal because we say that for competition's sake, it's not good that firms just decide to ban with each other to set a high price for the industry. Yeah, so there are many different stories of cartels that were busted. So yeah, one, for instance, in Quebec. I think in Canada or Quebec. Was the bread cartel between it was Weston and Loblaws. So that was to sell white bread, like yeah, pain blanc. And then, so they just decided to set the price higher than the market equilibrium, and they were busted and they had to pay lots of money. So one other famous case was the Lysin cartel, the Lysin price fixing conspiracy.
Is it always for products that are like supplement, complement?
Here we're talking about uniform products. It's so they all sell exactly the same thing. So yeah, the white breads sold by Weston and Loblaw are exactly the same white bread. Or yeah, not exactly the same, or maybe they have a different sticker, but it's super close, of course. And Lysin was just yeah, it's some product used to manufacture. Many food items. Yeah, and why do I talk about the Lysin cartel? Well, that's because there was a very fun movie that was made with it, so The Informant. Some of you have seen this movie, or it's a very fun movie. I recommend it. It's just it is Matt Damon who's mad at his bosses, and he realizes that they are conspiring with each other to set a higher price for Lysin, and this is between international firms. So you can even conspire with some international firm, and it's going to be against the US law to do that. Yeah, so and this is in the same way as we would legislate against a monopoly. If some firm has monopoly, then the state will say, oh, competition policy dictates that you should be split between 2 or 3 different firms. So it can be very complicated very quickly. So yeah, back in the days, there was this case against Microsoft. Is Microsoft a monopolist or not? So should Microsoft split or not? And then there was Google. So monopolists are more or less forced to prove that they're not a monopolist. Otherwise, they have to accept to be split. So by the same token, they couldn't just split the firm, but they would still act as a monopoly. No, they have to compete against each other. Yeah, so there is though one cartel that is not illegal, and that is the best cartel that we have for the world. Somebody knows which one it is? So the question is, what is?
Is it OPEC?
Yes, good. Answer. So why is it the best cartel? Well, because first of all, it's not illegal because it's just a bunch of countries that decide, oh, we control oil production or most of the oil production, so let's set a high price. So the rest of the world, well, go to war with us, maybe if you disagree with our policy, but that's what it is, and there's no international law that's, as long as we don't infringe on our own national law, then there's nothing wrong with having a cartel at the international level. So that's what they're doing. And why is it an awesome thing that they do that? Well, because we tend to have a problem with CO2, and people don't like to be taxed and don't like to have a high price for gas. So the gas would be much, much cheaper if they decided to produce as much as they did before the 80s. And so we would have a much bigger problem with greenhouse emissions. So and by the way, so this is so I'm teaching environmental economics too. So yeah, I tend to think about these things, and this is something that happens with so most people or countries. This is my own opinion. They tend to have a split mind. So on the one hand, they say, "Oh, we would really like to control." So I would take, for instance, a month ago, Biden's. So there was, yes, it was prior to the summit, but so the Biden administration said, "Oh, we would really like to reduce CO2 emissions and to reduce the use of cars and everything." And then a week later, they say, "Oh, we would like to ask the OPEC cartel to please increase production so that gas prices are not so high." So what is it? Do you say that you want to restrict CO2 emissions by limiting cars, or do you say that you want to increase? So that in some instances they say something, and in some instances they say some other things. Yeah, so in my opinion, OPEC is a nice cartel. I'm not saying that their product is nice. I'm saying that the fact that they are a cartel is nice. But obviously, it's not a perfect cartel, because when the US or Canada produces, or sometimes Russia, they stick with the OPEC policy, and then sometimes they do whatever they want. So they have some way of controlling the price, the international price, but not perfect. All right. So let's just see why. Why is a cartel difficult to maintain? Yes.
There's a good question in the chat. It asks if telecommunication could be a cartel.
Wasn't there an investigation into price fixing in Canada for that? For the bread cartel?
No, the telecommunication.
Oh, Videotron and Bell. Oh yeah.
Service provider.
Oh yeah, that's a neat example. I forgot about this. Yeah. So. Telecommunication. Yeah, so oops. So I don't know the details about this, but I know one thing. Internet and phone providers in Canada and the US, but especially Canada, are some of the most expensive in the world by far. And why is that? Well, many people say because there's not enough competition between the two big providers. Now there are new entrants like Fizz, like Virgin, like others now. So it looks a bit better, but you have to realize that most of them are sort of owned by the same conglomerate of other providers. So in the end, it's not like they can do whatever they like. It looks more like the same company that has an entry-level contract, which would be Fizz, for instance, and then a higher end contract for that would be, I don't know what Fizz is. Is it Bell or is it? Right. So I'm not going to click on that, but yeah, okay. So yeah, so this is a extremely good example. And so what happened? Why isn't it the same thing, for instance, in Europe? Well, in Europe, they really made sure that there would be a lot of different companies that would compete truthfully against each other, and the result is prices are very low. In the US or Canada, there's a tendency to side with the incumbent, so the people who are already there. Sometimes there's not as much energy that's put into making sure that there's enough competition in the market. Yeah, so that's a very good example. All right, so cartels tend to be unstable. Why is that? Well, because it's very easy to imagine if I'm in a cartel with 3 other firms, and they all collectively say, okay, we're going to restrict our production to a smaller production that we would otherwise have, but set a high price. But now I think, oh, but I'm a smart person. What I can do is sell at the same high price as my other cartel members, but sell a higher volume. So in that case, I take over the whole market. So this is what would happen here. So this is again the cartel strategy. So you set marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So the price is there. But as a member, what should I how much should I produce? Well, I shouldn't produce a small amount like Q0 or Q1. I should produce a high amount, Q2, such that my marginal cost equals the high price there. So that's always the best strategy I have, because what happens is, why? Because contrary to a monopolist, a cartel member could increase its production without the same impact on market price. So here it's a sort of stylized way of looking at it. Why? Because they assume that if you're a cartel member, you can still sell at P1, just like if all the cartel members did the same. So that's not exactly the case. So if I control, say, 30% of the market, and I increase my production from by 50%, then this is going to slightly affect the total price of the market. But I'm going to win much more than I'm going to lose because of that, because my fellow cartel members are not producing as much as they would. So you see that what happens is everybody has an incentive to cheat on the other people, on the other cartel member, to take over the market. It's like if Videotron and Bell agreed to set high prices, but then Bell decided, oh, I'm going to cheat on the agreement. So while Videotron sets a high price and restrict the supply, then I'm going to increase it. Well, might not be the best example, because in that case, it's telecommunication is complicated. But Weston or Loblaw, for instance. Yeah, that would be a better example. Yeah, so basically here, what the deal is that each cartel member has an incentive to set production to Q2 and not respect the cartel production of Q1.
Sir, can you just explain the first graph, because I don't really understand.
So the first graph is like the previous one. Like this one, it's always the same. So what happens is you have marginal cost, which is supply. So that's how much it costs for firms to produce each unit. And then they face a downward sloping demand. That's how much the market would be willing to pay for a certain quantity. And if they were in perfect competition, they would sell as much as they can until they don't make any money on the last unit sold. So that would be here. But if you are a monopolist, for instance, then you realize that there's a way for you to make more money. So the problem here is that if I sell at that quantity, and if the price is if this is the price and this is the marginal cost, and you see that on the large last unit sold, I make no extra profit on that unit. Because it costs me exactly the same amount as I'm selling it. So my goal as a monopolist, for instance, or as a cartel, it's the same thing. It's to sell not as marginal cost equals the demand, but marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And why are these two different? Because the marginal revenue curve accounts for the fact that, so let me go back to the beginning, accounts for the fact that if I sell an extra unit, it means that the market price is going to decrease. So my marginal revenue from selling this extra unit is not just how much I get, but also how much I lose from all the previous units I was selling. So that's why the marginal revenue curve, this curve there, is much steeper than the demand curve. And so what the cartel would like to be doing is act as a monopolist and set marginal cost equals marginal revenue. That's the best to maximize profit for the monopolist. And at that quantity Q1, then they can sell at a very high price P1. Now, this is from the perspective of one cartel member. So Q0 is what they would be producing in perfect competition. And then what happens is they decide collectively, we're not going to sell at Q0, we're going to sell a small quantity Q1, such that we are here and we make a high profit. But as one cartel member, my best interest would be to cheat on my partners and to not sell Q1, but decide to sell a very large quantity Q2 and take over the market. I promise that I'm going to sell a small quantity. Everybody's going to promise the same thing, but then cheat on that promise and sell a very large quantity and take over the market. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
A little note there says a cartel member's incentive to cheat when price is larger than marginal cost, but price is at P1, marginal cost is there. Are they not? I'm a little bit confused on the right graph there.
So here you see that marginal cost is here, it's very low, and market price is P1 is very high. So that's what happens there. The market price is higher than the marginal cost. So if we were here, then there's no cheating going on. It's just marginal cost equals price, and that's it. But if we produce Q1, which is smaller than Q0, then marginal cost is very low and market price is very high. Yes?
Yeah, sorry, I muted my mic.
All right. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does producing Q2 give more profit when they cheat?
Yes, of course. That's why they want to do it.
Okay.
That's exactly the goal. The goal is to but so yeah, one thing I could add is, of course, is this gonna work? Well, it's gonna work for a few days maybe, but then your competitors are going to realize, hey, wait a second, you said you were going to not produce a lot and produce Q1, but I can see that you're actually producing Q2, so you're cheating on your promise. So are we just going to sit there and still produce Q1? No, we're going to say, oh, forget the cartel, forget our agreement. Now we're not going to be to taken advantage of. And what's going to happen? Well, everybody wants to produce Q2, but this is going to set a production that's way too high. So eventually, they're all going to go back to Q0, so the initial place where they were before they decided to form a cartel.
Is it possible that they cheat with the price instead of the quantity?
So it's, yes, there's a lot of models going on. So we're going to see in the next chapter that's how actually. So the thing is, cartels cannot work when there is like 10,000 firms. You cannot agree with 10,000 people that you're going to have. So it's a conspiracy. So you need to have few people. And then what happens when you get out of the conspiracy? Then it depends on the way the market works. And sometimes we're going to see that there's different sort of competitions between a few big players. So there's what we call Cournot competition, which is setting the market price as it is with respect to the demand and competing with quantities. Or there's also a Bertrand model, which looks at competition with price, and then quantities are set as a consequence of price. So it's a very good question because, yeah, it's so oligopoly models are tricky, and yeah, we're going to see that later. But so what I can say is, whatever you decide, if you say that you're going to assume that monopoly members choose the quantity and then the price is set by the demand function, or you can see that we choose the price, but then the quantity is actually sold is a result of what the market price is. So one is dependent on the other. So you cannot say I'm going to choose the quantity on one side and also the price. Then you're just out of equilibrium completely. All good? All right. So problems that cartel face. Well, everybody has an incentive to cheat. And if people cheat, then at some point it means that you go back to perfect competition. Yeah, so products, so that the joint profit is not maximized. There's also another, yeah, so other problems with cartels. Firms that do not enter the cartel. So then they undermine the whole effort. So for instance, if the US or Canada or Russia do not set a high price like OPEC, then OPEC's effort to maintain high oil prices are, of course, undermined. And you have another problem too. Other problem.
Professor,
Yeah.
what is OPEC again?
It's or let me just check it to be sure. So it's oil producing countries, but I'll just I don't want to. OPEC, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Is that?
Thank you.
I don't know why it's this color. I didn't do that. Yeah. Other problem, which is a very interesting one. It's that, of course, so most cartels are illegal. So what do law enforcement do? So yeah, law enforcement want to so have lighter sentences for cartel members who testify against the other members. So what's the result? Well, if I'm in a cartel and I'm scared that maybe my other cartel member are going to go to the police because they want to save their own skin, well, I might as well go and talk to the police myself, so I have a lighter sentence. So you see that there's a lot of pressure for the cartel to it's like any criminal organization. You have the police, if you accept to denounce your co-conspirators, then you get a lighter sentence. By the way, for those who maybe you have heard about game theory, do you know what the name of this game is, or this situation is? No, nobody has heard of that.
Oh.
So that doesn't ring a bell. All right, it is the fact that for anybody who is caught, where if the police says, okay, I'm going to give you a very light sentence if you denounce your partner, but I'm going to punish you very harshly if you don't denounce your partner and your partner denounces you, then how does that put you? Well, it puts you in a very hard spot where no matter what you do, you're better off denouncing your partner. So if your partner doesn't denounce you, you think, oh, I'm going to denounce him and have a very light sentence. But if he does denounce you, then you're still better off talking to the police, because otherwise you go to into prison for 50 years. So that's so this very good setup that police has to essentially make it almost impossible for criminals not to denounce their co-conspirators. Yeah, so you're going to see that in game theory. Yeah, so that's a successful cartel must be able to prevent the entry of new producers. So this is linked to this this point here. So here OPEC should, but it's not able, but in principle, if OPEC wants to be successful, it should prevent Canada or the US to enter the market for oil, which is not the case. One other interesting aspect is that the successful cartels are often able to control the number of licenses. And if you control the licenses, then in a way you control supply. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to control the number of people who are able to supply the good that I'm supplying. So if I make sure that there's always an artificially low number of suppliers, then the price can artificially be low. And one person who has talked about a cartel in and this can be perfectly legal because licenses are perfectly legal. And this is one thing that has been denounced by a professor at HEC Montreal. So Pierre Thomas Léger. Talks about what? About the doctor cartel. Why? Because doctors control how many new students are admitted to medical school. While controlling how many foreign I would say how many immigrants are able to get their medical license. And oftentimes they realize that, oh, well, I was a perfectly fine doctor in my country and in France or in some other country, but I come to Quebec or Canada, and then, oh, they force me to go back to medical school and get my degree all over again. Why do they do that? Oh, it's to be sure that the quality of healthcare is top-notch for Canadian. Yes, maybe, but also it's a very good way to make sure that you don't have too much competition coming in the country. So if you control the medical students and you control the new and new people who could be doctors, then that's a very good way of controlling the supply. Now, proving this isn't all that easy, so it's a debate. So I'm not saying that's exactly the case. So, but yeah, Pierre Thomas Léger is somebody who's arguing that this is the case. So this is it would be an instance of a sort of cartel that's perfectly legal. All right. So that's what I wanted to say about cartels. Cartels are quite easy to analyze, actually. If you understand monopoly, then you just apply the same thing, the same analysis. And what you know is that once they have decided their quantity and their price, then they just split the extra profit amongst themselves. All right, so I've talked to you a bit about price discrimination. So what's price discrimination? Well, it's the uber ability for a monopolist to set a different price to different people. And this is a super interesting topic of competition theory because it goes on all the time, and understanding this is extremely useful to understand what's going on in the world. So let me just go back to the graph. Well, no, maybe they have a nice graph later on, so I can, yeah. All right, so here it is. Okay, so this is what happened. Well, as we've said, the problem with non-discriminating monopoly is that if you want to raise the price, then you have to restrict the quantity, or if you want to increase the quantity, you have to lower your price. But what if you were able to just look at somebody's, look at in their eyes and know, oh, that person, I know that that person is here, so I can sell that unit at price P1. And then this, this other person, I know that this other person is less willing to pay, so I can only sell it to at P3. But the fact that I set the price at P3, so for person 3, doesn't force me to set my my price, my lower price for the first person I sold the unit. So what's going on there? Well, I can essentially capture all of the consumer surplus, because the consumer surplus is all the area under the demand curve and above the market price. But if I set a price for each person, then essentially I just capture it. I make each person almost indifferent. So I know that, oh, you're indifferent between paying $30 or just not buying. Okay, well, I set it at $29.99 and you pay it, and I extract as much money as I can. And then the other person is indifferent between $25 or not buying. Well, I'm going to set the price to $24.99 so I can extract all the willingness to pay of that other person, etc., etc. So that's the best possible outcome for the monopolist, the one that allows you to extract all the value possible from the market. And yeah, so there are many different sorts of monopolies, of price discrimination. So I'm not going to go into detail about it. This is just an introduction, but it's a very neat thing. So here's, so just what we've been saying. So it's a sell by one firm of different units of a product at 2 or more prices for reasons that are not associated with differences in cost. So it's not that I sell a luxury version to some person and a cheap version for some other person, because the luxury version and the cheap version are different. It's exactly the same product, but I sell it at different prices. Yeah, and they're purely based on different buyers' evaluation of the same product. What do you need for that? Well, you need many things. You need market power, first of all. If you don't have market power, then there's a uniform price and that's it. So you have to have market power. So it has to be a monopoly, or as we'll see later, oligopoly, for instance. So, yeah, so or oligopoly. So oligopoly is a few large firms. We're going to see this in next chapter. There has to have different valuations of the product. Well, that's not difficult. Many people have different valuation. Yeah, so prevent arbitrage. So let's just say ability to prevent arbitrage. What does that mean? It means that here, if I sell a unit at P3 to that person, to a person that's willing at most to pay price P3, then that person is not able to take that unit and go back to the person number one and say, oh, you would be paying P1 if you bought it from the monopolist. Well, just buy it from me. And I'm going to sell you at not P3, let's say P2. So you get a better deal on it, and I get to capture some of the profits. So this is what we mean by arbitrage. So ability from one customer to buy the good price and resell it at higher price for profit. Yeah, and I could add for ability for the monopolist or the oligopolist to distinguish different willingness to buy. Based on behavior, characteristics, market segments, for instance, different countries. Etc. So if you have no way of distinguishing who is willing to pay at a high price and who's not willing, then you cannot discriminate. Yeah, so some examples of price discrimination in concreteness. So if you go to touristy areas, so are sold goods at a higher price because locals, no, they are tourists and they have a large budget. For their trip. So I remember once I was with a friend of mine who was a lady in her maybe 70s. And so there was some piece of jewelry that she liked. So so she said, oh, I like this piece of jewelry, how much? And then the seller said, for you, it's going to be 200. And so what he was doing there is looking, oh, I think that person I can extract $200 from that person. Not 200. Yeah, 200. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it was euros. Anyway, so what he's doing essentially is saying, oh, I think that person belongs to that segment of the market. But if I I asked for it, then you would have said, oh, maybe he doesn't have that much budget, so maybe he can he's willing to sell to buy for less. So to buy for less amount of money. So for instance, you have student prices. So what is it? That's discrimination. That's saying, oh, we know that students usually have lower purchasing power than other people. So we can sell them for smaller amount of goods. Other example, different prices for different quantities. So what's up with that? Well, why are, if you go to the grocery store, why are say small bottles of jam quite expensive for the amount of jam you have in them? But if you have if you buy the family pack, family value, which is a huge bottle of jam, then the quantity for the price for per gram of jam or per liter of jam is much lower. Well, they do that because they are able to know, oh, if you are somebody who wants to buy a small amount or somebody wants to buy a big amount, then by the fact of buying this quantity or that quantity, it tells us something about what segment of the market you belong to. And we are able, essentially, we know that if you want to buy a large quantity, then we're going to, basically we're going to pander to your segment of the market, which is a segment of the market in which people like to buy a big quantity. And if we sold it at the same price as somebody who was just willing to buy a super small amount, then you would probably not want to buy it from us. Other example. Different prices in different countries for the same product. So a good example of that is IKEA, or so online products sold to tourists again. So here they use the fact that if you're in a market where there is a lot of there are lots of different products, then they know that they have to compete much harder. So they cannot. So IKEA cannot sell a high price, but you can look the fact that prices in Australia, for instance, are super high. And why is that? Well, because Australia doesn't have a whole lot of competitors against IKEA. So IKEA knows that they are able to charge a much higher price. And this is online products sold to tourists. How does that work? Well, they use your IP address to know where you are from. So again, if they see that your IP address comes from a rich country like Norway, then they are going to take out the Norwegian price. And if your IP address is from lower income countries, then they know that, okay, if you have an IP address from Montreal, for instance, they know that the purchasing power of people from Montreal is much lower than people from Norway, so they cannot charge such a high price. Yeah, that's all sorts of tactics that they use. All right. So what did they do? Well, they capture the consumer surplus by charging different prices for different units sold. So here is the same, but again, they have to be able to discriminate between market segments. So price discrimination among units, that would be much more difficult. That would be saying something like, oh, you bought 3, then the 4th one is at that price that's different from the 3 first units sold. But between the different market segments, like young and old, for instance, then it's easier for them to distinguish. Yeah, another example I could add here is a different insurance contract. Based on past accidents or on deductibles. So when they say something like if you know you're a good driver, then come to us and we're going to give you a good price. So why are they saying that? Well, that's a way for them, again, to create different segments on the market. Oh, we want to put the bad drivers all together. So we know that we can charge them a high price because they're going to have an accident and we will have to pay for them. But if there are some good drivers and they self-report that they are good drivers and they can testify based on their driving history, then we know that there are clients we want to have because we're not going to need to pay for them a lot. So that's again a way to create different segments and extract as much money from bad drivers on the one hand and good drivers on the other. And if they couldn't do that, then what would happen is, if, for instance, I know I'm a good driver, then should I take this contract that's a middle of the road contract? Then I know I'm getting ripped off a bit because I'm going to pay for the accidents that other bad drivers are going to make. So if I can find some company that offers me a specific price based on my own talent as a good driver, for instance, then I'm going to go with that company rather than the other. So this information is awesome for, And another example I could add is targeted. Does that 2T or 1T? Not sure. Yeah, targeted ads on the internet. So you might have seen that. So for instance, if you want to buy, I don't know, curtains, then you look for curtains on the internet, and then the next day, then you see curtains everywhere, all over the ads on the website, and you're like, how do they know I want to buy curtains? Well, they have cookies that extract information from you, so that's very, very good. So they can send you specific ads. So that's also a way to segment the market, and if you click on them, then they have extra information. All right. So this, we've talked about it. So this is if you're able to, and the best, of course, would be to have information to have a specific price for each consumers. So that would be perfect discrimination, and then you would extract the whole market value from everybody. So this is the specific case where you have two segments. So segment A, segment B. So this, again, it assumes that they're not lumped together. If people of both segments are lumped together, then I only see a single demand function and I cannot really know anything about it. But imagine this is, I don't know, this is, let's just say this is young people and this is old people. So young people would like to buy a lot, but as long as the price is low, but their their demand elasticity is quite high. Whereas, let's say, old people, they want to buy fewer units, but they're willing to pay for a higher price if the units is if the amount supplied to them is low. Well, if I'm able to sell to the young people and prevent them from buying in this segment and sell to this segment and prevent them from buying this segment. So if I say, for instance, if you're between this age and that age, then this is the price for you. If you're between this age and this age, then this is the price for you. Then what's the best thing I can do? Well, I can set the optimal price based on these people's willingness to pay, and then set the optimal price for that segment for these people. And what will I do? Well, imagine that the marginal cost is the same for both segments. It's like 4 or something. Do they see what the marginal cost is? Yeah, it looks like it's about, this is 5, so it looks like it's 4. So you see that the marginal cost is the same for both segments. But what do I do? Well, this is the marginal revenue for segment A. And so I'm going to sell 20 units for segment A. And at 20 units, I'm going to set my price to, this is 14, yeah. Whereas for segment B, then I know that it's a large market, but very elastic supply curve. So I'm going to sell a large number of units, 36. Yes, that's the place where marginal revenue of segment B hits the marginal cost. But I can just, so it means that at 36, my market price is just 10. So yeah, I sell a large quantity with a low price for segment B and a small quantity for a high price at segment B.
Is that would be an example of like the Opus cards, for example, seniors get to pay less for the metro, and then students less, and then not regular people pay more.
Yeah, so that's a good example.
Sir, I don't understand the green shaded part of the graphs.
So this one, or this one and this one?
Like in the graphs where it's like shaded like turquoise.
Oh, this one there. So turquoise is, I don't know, turquoise in my mind is a mix between green and blue. So are you talking about the graph themselves?
The rectangles. I don't understand what the rectangles say.
Okay, that's the surplus I'm going to extract. So let me just finish writing this and then I can explain it. Based on age. So here you would have segment A. Let's say seniors. I don't know, because seniors, they pay a lower price. So let's say segment A is regular tariff. So and segment B. Student price. Okay, so let's go back again. So this is the demand curve for regular people, for working people. This is the demand curve for students. So lots of students want to buy the card, but you know that if you charge too much, then they're just going to find some other mean of transportation because they don't have a lot of money. based on this demand curve and this demand curve, I'm able to have this marginal revenue curve, which reflects the fact that if I increase 1 unit, I have to lower the price. So both segments have their own marginal revenue curve. And but what is my marginal cost of giving this supplying the service is the same. It's 4 in both cases. And I'm going to set for each market that the marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And that will mean that in the market A, marginal revenue equals marginal cost is at 20 units sold, market price 14. So that's here. Whereas in market B, it's 4 and sorry, it's 36 units sold and price of 10. And this is so the shaded gray is what I would get if I sold to the same price in both market, and the darker green is what I actually do. And this is obviously and the blue rectangles there are the surplus for
this is an example of like the graphs are kind of like a competitive market where the last unit sold is not making any money, right?
No. In that case, it does make money. In that, so this is so it's STM is a perfect example because they have the monopoly on the buses. So they set their price. Well, they have other goals in mind, but strictly speaking, from a monopolist point of view, what they see is that they can sell they can set a higher price for regular people and a lower price for students. And yeah, at the last unit sold, what is the markup? What is the extra surplus for the last unit sold? It's 14 minus 4, so that's 10. And here was the profit from the last unit sold, or the surplus for the student segment. It would be 10 minus 4, so it would be 6. Yeah, so there is pure profit in this case. You cannot have a segmentation or price discrimination if you don't have market power. I'm a bit over time, so let me just quickly. Oh, there's hurdle pricing. Yeah, well, let's just finish quickly with hurdle pricing next time. All right. So unless there's a final question, we can finish here. All good? Okay, so I see you on Thursday.
Thank you, sir.
Professor?
Thank you.
Professor?
Yeah.
I have a question about the lab 9.
Yeah.
Like the previous lab.
So something that you want to ask me.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So like usual, I'm going to stop the class here and then answer a question. So 3, 2, 1. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.